And if you can remember those three things, then metaprograms are very easy. The end of your beginning is near. Well, you came here under the understanding that you would be offered something called a certification as a master practitioner of neurolinguini parmigiana. Yes, well, you know that Father Guido Sarducci, Vatican gossip columnist, also a humorist, by the way, that wasn't quite enough to signal it was humor, is a master practitioner of NLP. He used to do a play on what the different possible meanings of neurolinguistic programming could be. Since no one really wants to use that term, do they? How about nice, likable people? Nothing like profit? Natural learning processes. Ah, yes, a lot of people like that one. And we make this distinction in the field between a practitioner level and a master practitioner level. Now, you have a couple of ways you can consider this. One is that the practitioner level, kind of like the original orientation to schools, was the 7 stages of man. Therefore, school had 7 years in it, right? And then they realized they couldn't teach everything in 7 years, so they added on high school. Well, purgatory. I mean, so you've got to change. Like, or you can presume that there actually is a structural difference between what it means to gain a practitioner certification, what it means to gain master practitioner certification. In the words of John Grinder, the practitioner training is designed to remediate any difficulty that a person might have, whereas the master practitioner program is designed difficulties people have never had before. Or words to that effect. No, John, a distinction was made between a remediative or remedial, that is to remediate difficulties, versus generative, versus the ability to create what wasn't there before. Now, another way to think about that is a difference between technique and being able to work beyond technique. And here we enter a very interesting conundrum, if you will, in NLP, because we teach you from the get-go to honor people's individual models of the world, yes? In the words of Robert Dilts from the Magnus Opus, NLP Volume 1, Dilts Bandler et al., that NLP is to describe and enrich people's maps of the world. Then we turn right around and what do? We teach techniques that you can apply to people irregardless of their model of the world. And when we teach strategies in the practitioner, we demonstrate that by offering, in many cases, the taking criticism strategy, which is they need before they meet certain trainers. So, and it doesn't matter whether they had it or not before. How's that possible? That is, we don't even ask what the model of the world is. We say, okay, Rick, I want you to sit there and see yourself behind a plexiglass bubble. And then over there, we're going to have a guy. And that guy looks remarkably like you, but he's far enough away that he looks like he's across the street. So you can kind of watch him and be uninvolved. And over there, that guy has somebody walk up to him, and it's like a drunk guy, and he goes, "You're a turkey," and you see that guy over there, and what does he do? He kind of laughs it off, doesn't care anything about it. So it fades away, and then same guy looks remarkably like you. He's over there. And another guy walks up. It's a stranger, but, sort of well-dressed kind of stranger. Walks up and he goes, "Well, asshole," and again, he doesn't respond. But something different happens. You watch, and a plexiglass shield comes up around that guy over there that looks remarkably like you, yeah? And the criticism bounces off. Or maybe it's displayed outside the plexiglass on, you can see the words like a bubble, like in a cartoon. So he can evaluate the criticism. Meanwhile, that Ricky's smiling just like you are there. He's inside there, way over there, see? And he's feeling good. And then that scene fades away. And now it's like it's some coworker of that guy way over there, because you're behind the plexiglass bubble. And this coworker comes up and they say something, and before that first voice tone gets on, whoosh, that plexiglass shield, boom, comes up, stops that criticism. That guy over there, he's feeling really relaxed. He's able to ask meta-model questions. He's very resourceful, and he's responding to the other person. And then when the criticisms pass and the things are, then the shield comes back down, because you don't want to teach people to be dissociated and fractionate all the time, right? Right. So you're teaching, it's a dissociation strategy. You understand that. You can see the structure. You're a master practitioner. So the shield comes up, but you also want the shield to be able to come down, because you want the person to be able to be open to those people that he wants to be open to. Okay, so now going along, now some family member, and again, shields are down, family member, but then there's a criticism, and before that criticism can get all the way, shield comes up, stops the criticism. Inside, Rick, he's feeling relaxed. This guy over here, he's talking. He's got meta-model questions. He's resourceful. He's asking, finding out, discovering what's going on, learning more. Okay, like that. And then, passes situations, and shield comes down. Now, guy comes up that looks like the guy there. It's his inner voice, or one of them. Yeah, says something. Whoosh, shield comes up. Now, a little negotiation, discussion, finding out, positive intent, guy right there behind the shield, feeling resourceful. Yeah? How's that working out? That's nice, yeah. So, would you like to have the learnings that this guy has? Now, I want you to check ecologically. Here is the question. If you have that, what difference is it going to make? How's it going to affect your life?
When that voice that sometimes comes up, kind of step back from it.
Okay, and be able to engage. Because it's not merely about having a shield, right? It's not merely about being resourceful and ignoring the situation. There's a lot of stuff in here that we can begin to see now as structure, which is that you want the person to be able to dissociate. You want the person to be able to draw on their other NLP skills. I mentioned the meta model. I mentioned being resourceful. I mentioned engaging the other person. And you want the shield to be able to come down, because you want the person to be able to be open and connecting with those people that he wants to be, to have a attitude or interaction with the world that's mostly in the self position, but be able to step over to observer, because that's what we're creating, right? Be able to have observer come up spontaneously and protectively, and then have him in a resourceful state be able to interact with that, make evaluations, make choices, and then have that shield come down as appropriate, so again, he can be totally present and not be an observer in life. Yeah? Okay. So allow the shield to come down there, and allow the shield to come down here. And then you can have that person, they can walk over to you or come over to you. Some people like to reach out their arms and take that in. In whatever way that makes sense to you. There you go. It's to do it gently so you can really feel that going in. That's right, going in.
I can't do it too fast.
That's right. Do it as slowly as you need to thoroughly experience that in every cell, in every thought, all through your experience, available to you at every moment now and in the future. Yeah. Now, most people do it a lot better than him.
Well, my body said it did it.
Well, and that's the thing. This is where you test. It's one of the great things, is you can test this one right away. You can go, man, oh man, you are the slowest snail that has ever done this thing. I've taught this to rocks that did it faster.
I'm saying, way to test, Charles.
All right. What is that? That is the taking criticism strategy, modeled off of the strategies of Steve Andreas. And we teach that in the Practitioner. It's a review for some of you that haven't attended the Comprehensive Practitioner. And that particular format, we teach it to everybody because, well, most people don't have a systematic way of being able to be present and also be dissociated. In other words, stay with the person. I got to leave now. Instead, they can stay there interact with the person, feel resourceful, ask questions, and engage. And the idea here is, again, coming back to the question that we teach techniques to everyone while we tell people to honor everyone's individual model. How do we make sense of that? And that is that there's a principle of self-organizing systems, that the system will reorganize around the more elegant pattern. Elegance principle, if you will. So in offering Rick this strategy, it's if this strategy is better than the one he has, then he's going to take that on. Because in a sense, what we're doing is upgrading his system, again, taking the programming metaphor, that we're offering a different algorithm, a different heuristic, a different sequence, and going, try this one. Now, the thing is, we do this in life. I don't know if you remember, back maybe it was math class for you, and the person next to you was able to solve the problem, and you looked over, you know, this was called cheating, of course, but you looked over and you went, oh, and then bang, you could do it. Other people have this experience when they're first introduced to the spelling strategy. Visualize words? Who thunk it? Oh, think it, right. Okay, so it's a question of once you get the strategy, you immediately go, that's a better way to do it, and you incorporate it immediately. And as I said before, you can think of every NLP technique as a strategy, that you're offering the person a different way to do things. And when that's offered to the system, whether it's the combining of conflicting aspects, whether it's learning a new strategy, whether it's being resourceful, stepping into a future, that any one of those, the brain in some way, say the brain, as if it were different from the body and all the rest, but the system goes, better idea, and reorganizes around it. So the next time that that happens, well, the anchor is already there, that it goes, we're going to go down this path, not that path. Otherwise, what sense do you make of the phobia process? You get a powerful, powerful response from looking at an elevator, for example. And then you do this simple thing where you step out of it, watch yourself having that experience over there till it's done. And then if you really want to do it upright, run it backwards, right? Step back in, and you don't have the phobia anymore. People worry about, how can I do this stuff covertly? Keep this in mind. You are the member of a field that believes that if you have a person step out of the picture and run it backwards, they won't have the feeling anymore. Do you realize how out there that is? In a sense, everything you do is covert. The only way it's not covert is you go, I'm going to do a process with you, Michael. Then it's not covert. But if you do it any other way, just the premise of what we're about, that if you rearrange your thinking, it'll rearrange your feeling, it'll rearrange the structure, it'll rearrange your possibilities. It's a radical proposition. Now, the difference between practitioner and master. Well, you've got the techniques and you're still learning techniques, but to truly step into the mastery is to go beyond the problem orientation problem, also known as the error correction error. Well, a lot of psychotherapy, basing itself on mechanics, had a problem orientation. That is, why would you go see a shrink, or why would you seek help if there wasn't a problem? In other words, you've got to have a problem in order to have a solution. And here we really get down to the use of techniques, is you have a problem, and therefore you've got to find the right solution to it. And towards the end of the practitioner program, we taught that. We actually said, instead of figuring out what the person's difficulty is, you could say, Paul, do you have an inner voice that sometimes rains on your parade?
Yeah.
And Paul goes, yeah. And then you can do the thing with the arm, bring the voice down, change things around, do some submodality work. Say, Paul, do you ever feel divided about stuff?
Oh, yeah.
And he goes, yeah. And then you can go boom, 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 and you can do the rest of the integration process. Or you now know that you could, like we demonstrated with Gene, have the person write down all the criteria for this one, write down all the criteria for this one, put them together, mix them up, start from the beginning, and they'll be integrated. How is that possible? First of all, strategies and parts are, as we know, different models. They are. The premises are different. The distinctions you make in the models are different. In the strategies model, there are no parts. Strategies are about a sequence of internal and external representations leading to an outcome. And if you take all of the criteria in all those representations and you bring it to the front and run that criteria from the beginning, you'll get a congruent response in the strategy. Parts, on the other hand, or framing, is premised on the idea there are different frames in life and that you might activate certain criteria in one frame and certain criteria in another frame. And if you reify those frames to the point where you have strategies and you have intention in them, you have a part. You have the part that's objecting. It's you. How can this part object? We don't know, but we can do this. We're very creative. So you have this part, and you're going, how you doing? I'm doing fine, but I'm not doing what you want. Okay, so then you have to negotiate with yourself, right? And we teach methods for doing that, which are based on criteria and hierarchies of criteria. What's important about that? What's important about that? Boom, 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 boom. And then you can bring it together because you found agreeable criteria, a different model. What we're doing here in Master Practitioner is moving beyond the techniques and, like I'm doing right now, beginning to take these apart and show the structure so that you can combine them in different ways, so that you can create things that weren't there before. Now, we've taken this further when we looked at the idea of strategy types, because you could take, well, maybe they have a problem with their decision strategy. Maybe it's a problem with their motivation strategy. Towards the end of yesterday, I began to suggest a different orientation. I suggested an orientation that's more functionally oriented. The idea, instead of looking at things problematically, is to look at what if you're doing a tune-up? What if instead of you're trying to fix something, you're looking for optimizing, in a particular case, the functionability of something? That is, you want to create highly functional decision strategies, motivation strategies, conviction strategies, and so forth, so that it's no longer a question of fixing something. It's no longer a question of somebody having to have a problem to interact with you with this material, or yourself, but rather you could go, how can I make this work better? And by adding functionality to the whole system, raising your levels of performance. Now we're getting closer to the work of George Leonard when he talked about mastery. George Leonard, an Aikido master, and deserved of the term, many, many years spent on this. And he realized that when you're becoming a master of something, you have these learning areas where you're just like you're going up an elevator really, really fast. It's like being one of these courses. You're learning stuff every day. And then it seems like you're not learning stuff for a while. The plateaus. And he talks about this in Aikido of going to the dojo, and you're practicing and you're practicing and you're practicing the throws and you're practicing all these different things, and nothing really seems to be changing. And then it's like suddenly you get another increase in ability. And sometimes, well, my own example with this was when I first came in NLP, I was read Gregory Bateson. That was a big deal back when we came in. We were still reading Gregory Bateson. And I buy the book, and Steps to the Psychology of Mind, and I'm looking at this and I'm going, talk sense. I'm going, what is this about? So, well, you might as well know. I mean, it's like I'm going, I have no idea. So I put it away. And then I move, and then I move again. And I'm unpacking in my new apartment, and I find this book. I went, oh, Steps to Psychology of Mind. That's really important. I was supposed to read that. Crazy guy. And I open it up, and I go, this is really easy. I get what I get this now. So I thought. I mean, later on, I find out there's a whole bunch more to get. But the point is that we have these moments where we return to something, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, whether it's a book or whether it's like seeing a new client, and something that stumped us before, we go, oh, and it's something happened in the practice. Something happened, as Leonard would say, in the plateau. The idea of having a practice, of thinking about this. So as we're really moving today from the practitioner to the master, we're doing several things. We're moving from the technique to the elements. We begin to play with the elements And like Aikido, like any sport, like something that you do as a discipline, as a practice, is you engage in it just to engage in it. And in that process, you get more and more learnings. So that when you have a difficulty or when a client brings you something, whether it's a difficulty or an opportunity, you have had all this extra practice. You can go, oh, I have an idea. That rings a bell. So this morning, the two domains of distinctions I want to bring together for practice, for play, for your initiation into being master practitioners are the areas of strategies and the meta-program types. Now you recall that we spent a good deal of time on the meta-programs, and yet we never actually referred to these classes. In your notes, you'll find that what I've attempted to do is take all of the meta-programs and organize them into classes. Now, it's curious to me because about the same time I did this, Laura Ewing, I don't know if you know Laura Ewing, wonderful trainer consultant, she also was doing consulting with people, and she noticed that if she went into a business and she worked with 5 variables, that she could get huge changes with groups. And it turns out that one of those variables could be the logical level, if you will, the person was working on. Another variable would be the chunk size, that is, how big a piece of information was the company playing with. Another would be the time frame, were they more future-oriented or past-oriented or present-oriented. And another, the perceptual position. And by taking sort of one from each column, that she could help them to rethink their experience. Well, with my game Tremurti, I found the same thing, that if you varied one of each of these categories, the person could not put the experience back together the way it was before. In other words, it had been loosened to the point that the person's unconscious, that whole system, needed to reorganize along a more elegant pattern. In other words, it was like loosening it enough that a spontaneous reorganization could take place. So they would have new choices, new possibilities. And so while there's no yet neurological reason to classify in this way, you may find it useful as a way of understanding how it is that people utilize their experience. Now, we've already looked at decision strategies in detail, and to a lesser extent, motivation and conviction. And we know that certain meta-programs are more prevalent in certain strategies than others. For example, we know that with a decision strategy, that the content or the category of experience is fairly important. That whether it's a decision about people or a decision about things or an activity, it makes a difference. We were finding as we worked advanced levels of that it's even a difference when you think of people as things or information as a relationship and how that warps things in certain ways. When we looked at motivation, we realized that direction, the towards, away from, the passivity or reactivity, the way in which a person got to action very much had a bearing on the level of motivation. And we also, when we looked at conviction strategies, we noticed we were looking at the time frame. That is, that some people measure time in terms of how much time has to pass to make a decision. I mean, think of it this way. Could you make a conviction about something if you had one event when you were 5 years old, and another event when you were 15, another 25, and say another at 50? It's a curious thing. You could, if they were of a certain intensity and so forth, had the same person or something, but more than likely you would never connect the events. When we're making generalizations, when we're running a conviction strategy, we have to run that within a sufficiently short period of time. For example, would you decide a restaurant was good based on a visit once every 3 years? You go, well, no, there's too much time in between. It makes it unreliable. The chef could have burned down. I mean, so we actually have unconsciously a time frame in which we have to run our number of examples or we have to run our time with experience. So this is simply a way of beginning to suggest that there are certain meta-programs for each strategy that are more prominent. Now, as I've said, they're all running all the time. This goes to Steve Andreas, likes to talk about people who say, well, you're only using 10% of your brain, you know. And I point out that right now, you're not really using your legs, right? You're not really using your feet. You're not really using your back except to hold you up. There's a lot of, you're not using your digestive system, well, perhaps from this morning, but not in the way that you were initially. And as Steve likes to point out, you're not using what's between your legs either. But we're all glad we have these. We might want to use them later. So in this same way, you talk about you're not using all of your brain. Well, no. If you're using all of your brain, by the way, is a grand mal seizure. Then you're using all your brain, right? What we're talking about is the sophistication of how the elements come together. So instead of teaching a technique, which we've been doing, we want to begin to move toward the idea of playing with the elements, of beginning to notice, what is this made of? How does it work? Now, to do that, we're going to draw on stuff you've learned before. For example, contrastive analysis is essential to NLP, the difference that makes the difference. Our neurology is only organized to notice difference. Now, once it gets into our neurology, yes, Ron, you can notice sameness. But it's got to get there first, right? And that so when we want to figure out different performances, what's happening in one situation versus another, what we can do is to do a contrastive analysis. So as a way to get us started this morning, I want to take a look at motivation strategies. It's because these are fundamentals. We're going to move through the other strategies as time allows. And decision and motivation are two of them that both hang people up and are just rich with possibilities because of the kind of world we currently live in. You're supposed to make lots of decisions, and then you're supposed to motivate yourself to do them. Is this ridiculous or what? Remember sequencing. You could motivate yourself first and then decide what to do. I don't know that many people that are able to do this about tax time, though. Going, yeah, I'm motivated. Let's go do taxes. So there's the other one as well. There's the idea, got to do this now. How do I motivate myself to do it? Understanding, again, that we notice strategies when they're not working rather than when they're working. Yes. So contrastive analysis, utilizing the tote of motivation. What do we know about motivation that makes it different as a strategy type from a decision? Well, we notice that the operation has the function of accumulating in some way. Accumulating a feeling coming up, accumulating a certain brightness, a loudness, in other words, judging that difference. And that we know that the function of the test is to determine threshold. So what's a threshold over which we get up and turn off the clock radio in the morning? What's a threshold over which we tell somebody, look, I know you have opinions, you keep them to yourself. We have these, in other words, we have these thresholds. We are running what? This is something else to note here. I'm going to put a little letter in here. We're talking about analog information, like a volume control, like a dimmer switch. Something louder, softer, brighter, darker. Motivation is an analog to a threshold. That's different than a decision, which by and large is utilizing digital information. This has to do with the different information types. Now you're looking at quizzically, and you can find counterexamples, but I'm saying the predominant kind of information, just like in the notes, I'm saying certain meta-programs, like the content meta-program, like the factors are more prominent in a decision than they are in a motivation. Meanwhile, yes, these can be going on in various ways all the time. So we want to pick out a situation in which you were easily motivated. Now, this gets to the idea of form. Easily motivated like in chocolate, or easily motivated in the sense of you didn't want to do it, but you went ahead and did it anyway. You know who Rollo May is, right? He was a famous existential psychologist. And he wrote a book called The Meaning of Anxiety. This is wonderful. This is how people can make meaning out of a structure. He's a very smart guy. He just didn't know about this, all right? I feel like I'm telling tales, and I am. He wrote this book called The Meaning of Anxiety because he realized one evening is that he was washing the dishes. There was a teacup he put in the sink, is a story he tells. And he looks at that teacup, and he realizes it's a dirty dish, and that there will be more and more dishes there. And he imagines a pile of dishes, all dirty. And then he says, I should clean this. And then he goes, I was anxious about the dirty dishes, and that got me to clean them. Therefore, anxiety is useful. Anxiety has meaning. Now, what would we say about this? It's an away from motivation strategy. And what did he do? He ran the strategy. He didn't let the actual dishes accumulate. No, he imagined this pile of dishes. And then, okay, now I have to wrap it. I have to clean this dish before there's more. It works. Yeah. But you might want to look at the functionality. Is it necessary to wind yourself up to do that, to get yourself to wash that dish? What did you find out about that in terms of the tote? Let's go back here. In terms of his tote, what do you know already from that description? This is modeling. You can do this with strategies. Well, you know that he has a higher threshold, yeah? Because the one dish wasn't enough. The cup and saucer, he had to, the cup and saucer, probably spoon too. He had to imagine a lot of them. And then, so what's his operation? See the one cup, multiply, and he sees the one cup, it doesn't get him to wash it. So then, see more. See more, right. So he's, and then bang. There are alternatives when you understand strategies in terms of their functional principles. He could have lowered his threshold. New behavior generator? Well, he could have imagined himself, stepped out like we did with Rick, step out, see the sink, see this guy go up, see the one dirty dish, and say, let's clean it now. And see that, watch the guy rehearse that. In other words, have a lower threshold for the activation of the strategy. Counterwise, he could have done an Animal House kind of thing, or like The Odd Couple, and he just could have waited until there was actually a pile full of dishes in the sink. Right? It's an interesting use of imagination. What we want to get at here is that none of these are good or bad, but they're examples of solutions. After all, there are dirty dishes in life. Sometimes there's not somebody else to clean them. What solutions can we have, and how can we, utilizing the principles and strategies, make that more functional for ourselves, for others? Maybe it makes sense to wash the dish. With the Russians, when the aristocracy was forced to leave after the Bolshevik Revolution, is they, as a ritual of travel, they would have a cup of tea before they left. And so there were the couple, and all their stuff's packed up, and they had the tea out, and they're making tea, and they're sipping tea together, and then they wash those 2 cups, saucers, and pack them, and then they leave. That's a very different relationship to washing. And I only tell that to just demonstrate there's a lot of possibilities when you begin to think about the content in terms of structure. So, this morning, you have a less than functional motivation strategy, and you have a functional motivation strategy. What is the structure of the problem of the non-function? You want to get yourself to do something you don't want to do. However, in other parts of your life, you're able to do this. Not only that, the other members of your team have their ways of doing it. So that you can now go in with the idea, what we're going to do this morning is we're going to model out the features of those differences. We're going to model those out in terms of the tote. So what criteria is the person using? What's the evidence of threshold? Are they in fact using a motivation strategy? Or are they using a decision strategy? Is it misplaced? Some people try to do that. It's like they use a learning strategy to get themselves to do stuff they don't want to do. I'm learning something new. God, I never knew about dividends. And so, a trick of the mind, if you will. And you want to find out how their operation works. And you want to make notes about which metaprograms the person is bringing to bear on this, how they're utilizing time. Think about our friend Rollo May. He's got this one dish in the sink, and then part of his strategy is he projects himself into this future where every dish is in the sink. Has a reaction, comes back, brings that reaction back to the present, and then goes ahead and does it. Just to encourage you, let me offer you another one, which is, this is the way a lot of people find themselves in front of the refrigerator. It's also called future pacing. Instead of being associated, going to the future, bringing the feeling back, another way to do it is you're dissociated and you see yourself engaged in the behavior. Internal voice, what would that be? Time to do the dishes. It might work, might not. It's like you have a time to do the dishes. Or you could go, the dishes. Bum, 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 bum. In some way, it's different, right? Person sees themselves. Next thing you know, they're up, I'm just doing the dishes. In other words, stepping in kind of thing. So even in something as simple as what we think we know about, something like a motivation strategy, there are different ways to do it. Now's the time to get curious. Now's the time to look at the elements and how they relate. The idea is you begin to play at this point in the training. So, structure of the exercise, which I don't think requires a demonstration. We have the difficult to motivate, and we have the easy or reliable, however you think about it, motivation. And you're going to get the test, and you're going to get the operation. You're going to be sussing out metaprograms as well. Of course, you can feel free to turn to your metaprogram page, look at the motivation metaprograms, use those as a starting place, and model out the different strategies. Then we're going to pause there. We're going to come back, find out what you learned. We're going to create some strategies that work, and then we're going to have you go back and try those out or tweak what the person has. It's all about getting interested in what's going on over there. All right? Questions? Looking at about 15 minutes a person, which means you're going to need about 5-7 minutes for each of these. More than enough time, provided you just go in there and get specific. If there's one presupposition that's not up here, it would be right there, and it would say NLP lives in the specific. NLP works in the specific. If you talk about motivation in general, you're going to have problems. You go, so give me an example of of where you're having trouble motivating yourself. Now, what's an example of where it's easy for you to motivate yourself? And it's still something that, is not that much fun, but you do it. Dishes, laundry, garbage, clean the garage, wash the car, do the quarterly reports, whatever it is, something like that. All right? What's that?
Go to the gym.
Go to the gym. Exercise, yes. All right, let's go.